Hello, everyone. Welcome to our August Fandango here. Let me get into slideshow. So, happy August, wherever you are. Hopefully, you don't have too much heat or smoke or whatever. It could be plaguing you this time of year. We're glad to have you. We're going to wait a few more minutes to see if anybody wanders by. See if we get anybody else to join us. But a reminder that all of our recorded sessions from earlier this year are all on our website, and you're welcome to have a look at them free of charge. But we will go ahead and get going. Today, we're talking about ERGs, resource groups, and other internal support structures that you might find in the workplace, and why you might want to use them, and how to start an ERG if that's your interest. So let's get started. EvoLibri, we are located here in Silicon Valley in California. We provide multidisciplinary services to neurodivergent teens and adults, their families, their employers, sometimes their school districts, sometimes police departments and parole officers throughout their lives. That's our job, and we've been doing it for 18 years now. So who am I? My name is Johnston-Tyler, and I am the founder and CEO of EvoLibri Consulting. Prior to this, I had about a 20-year run in mid-level management in tech here in Silicon Valley, and decided to change up my career in my 40s, and here we are. We also have Keith Halperin, talent and placement expert, who came to us a little bit over about a year ago, I guess now. And he is one of our premier job developers here at Evo. So the topics for today. We're going to talk about the internal structures that you might find in the workplace and how to maybe create them or find services or support structures outside of the workplace, but all really relating to getting help at work. So we're going to talk about what the common support structures are in today's world. We're going to talk about the pros to internal support structures, some of the pitfalls from internal support structures. We're going to also go over real briefly how you can start or create support structures at your workplace. And we've got a nice list of references for you to read at the end. And we're going to briefly talk about how to lead or what it's like to lead an ERG. All right. Mr. Keith, you want to start us off with what people can expect?
Yes, indeed. What you can expect as far as common support structures in the workplace. They vary a great deal depending on the size of the organization as well as the nature of it. So larger companies big companies usually have the most robust offerings. EAPs, for those of you not familiar, employee assistance programs, mentors, coaches, maybe an employee resource group, and a disabilities coordinator. Somewhat smaller or mid-sized companies may be more services or fewer services. You can typically find out by asking your HR rep or looking at the company's intranet. And then the smallest companies, they tend to be more informal and have less services. That may work to your advantage, though. Janet, any additional thoughts on those?
No, I mean, the only difference I've seen really is in mid-sized companies, it depends on the company, but sometimes they have somewhat cooler resources than really big companies or really small companies. I've seen some mid-sized companies do things like provide financial assistance for therapy instead of offering EAPs, that type of thing. So a little bit different, but your mileage may vary. Definitely. Just depends on the company. All righty. So why use internal services? some may look askance at, why would I want to participate in any service that my job is offering if the problem I have is with my job? And that makes sense to a degree, but here are some positives of using internal services. So the first is obviously low or no cost. So one of the primary reasons you might want to look at least at the internal resources is because they're typically free. The company usually funds them or sometimes subsidizes the cost. This means to you that you can get services either with absolutely no cost or at a fraction of what you might spend if you went outside of the company and paid out of pocket.
Mhm.
Another reason you might want to use internal services is because if it's a company or an organization that has worked with your company for any length of time, they may have a handle on the corporate culture, how things are done. This is particularly important if you're a new employee and you're trying to get sort of understand the lay of the land. How are things done at company A? When I used to work at company B for years. The other things to be aware of is, in these organizations can be useful, particularly when there's been changes to the organization itself that are rippling across the org, right? So, for example, a massive layoff. If several people are using the same service, then the people who are providing the service are well aware that there's been a layoff or that there's been a change in executive leadership or that there's been change in the overall strategy of the company, which might be causing chaos. So all of these things, you would find you'd have a higher chance of working with somebody who understood these changes if they were inside internal services or hired by the company versus just going to somebody outside. Finally, especially for mentoring and for ERGs, using services within the organization is a great way to build internal relationships with coworkers. For example, you're not going to be able really, no, it's harder to find a mentor outside of your company. You can, but they aren't going to know what's going on in your company per se or exactly. They're also not necessarily going to be useful in terms of helping you seek out new opportunities within the organization, writing a letter of recommendation, that kind of thing, right? Because they are outside of the company. And employee resource groups, of course, typically live within the organization. That's kind of their whole part and parcel of what they do. And within an ERG, you can certainly build those internal relationships with your coworkers. Any comments, Keith?
Oh, yes, this is very helpful. One thing that we're clearly going to be doing, viewers, is go through the types of service providers, their pros and their cons, and such on. What might be useful, though, in addition, Jan, is if someone is listening to this and they're not sure what type of actual services are available or what they might want to go to one of these internal services, what are some of the things that might be offered and why would someone want to go to one or more of them?
So definitely, and you're right, we haven't yet talked about how do you find out if there are services available. So the first place to look would be your intranet,
Mhm.
the corporate website, right? The internal view, because often if you dig through services, employee services, you're going to find what they have available. You can also talk to your HR rep who should be well aware of the different types of groups. So you can talk to your HR rep and say, hey, do we have a mentor program? Do we have any ERGs? Is there interest in ERGs? So that is something you can definitely do at any time throughout your career in any given company.
Excellent.
Indeed. All righty. So Keith, pick it up.
Okay. Um, as with many things, there's pros and there's cons, there's advantages, and there are some drawbacks. What are some of these? As we said, with the drawbacks, you got to be careful. Perhaps some of these may not be specialized. ERPs and mentors may not understand your neurodivergency and the specific struggles you face. I've run into that in my own case, in a particular case, not specifically with an ERP, but with the therapist that I was working with, who's good at many things, but really didn't have a conception of autistic spectrum problems. 2, keep the drama low. Okay, mentors and ERGs are not good places to bash the company. You know, you want to be as positive as you can when interacting with others in the company. 3, politics. ERGs in particular may become political, with one group wanting to move in one direction and others not buying in. I've already been running into that sort of thing with a number of the clients that I have who are part of ERGs, that there are various factions involved and interest groups based on a variety of things. So that can make things rather interesting. But, you can take that into account. So Jen, back to you.
Excellent. So here's a couple examples of bad services you might run into. So with a mentor, and these are based on real life examples, a mentor signed up because they had an autistic son, and so they thought it might be great and rewarding to be a mentor to an autistic employee. However, the relationship was kind of uncomfortable for the employee because the mentor never really saw the employee as a peer, but kind of as a surrogate son, and would bring things up like, well, what I do with my son or what my son does. So he never really felt like he was being seen as an individual wholly different than this person's son. EAPs, the employee assistant programs, and I've heard this before, but this particular case was pretty bad, where an employee sought out an EAP therapist who didn't understand autistic burnout and challenged this client to just power through and keep going in and doing the work. It was a fake it till you make it, which the client did until they had a huge meltdown in a meeting and they just couldn't do anything. They had to leave and they went immediately on an LOA, a leave of absence. It was hugely embarrassing to the employee and he eventually left the company. ERG. So this one's from the past, but it still kind of rankles me, where an ERG was set up for employees at a large company. And the executive sponsor decided that he was going to blend a group that had been set up for parents of autistic children with the employee group. And it ended up over time that the parents ended up running the ERG. And it was more revolving around what the parents needed the company to do to support their parenting of autistic kids, rather than a true group for the autistic people to find help and support as employees in the workplace. So it turned out that the employees really had no voice in this group and they just stopped going, which was really kind of sad because the two were very different, obviously, different needs that were kind of conjoined. Corporate coaches also, if they don't understand neurodivergency and they're just working from a typical workplace coach songbook, so to speak, it may not work well. So I know of one person who worked with a coach who didn't understand her communication struggles, that she really had a hard time not feeling anxious, and she sometimes was short with people, and the coach believed that she was not trying hard to be pleasant. There's also a little bit of sexism here. And it was really disastrous because this person was really trying to communicate clearly and concisely through her anxiety, and it was taken the wrong way, which really did not work well for her. It was quite disastrous. Not good stuff. All right, Keith.
Yeah. Well, one thing with the latter three, the EAPs, the ERGs, and the coaches, one thing that employees can do before engaging with them is to ask if the various providers, the EAP, the ERG, or the coach, is familiar with neurodivergent issues. If they're not, you can say, well, I don't think then this would be a good match, or I'm willing to try, or, but at least you go in ahead of time knowing what to expect.
Good points.
Thank you.
All right, this is yours, Keith.
All right, some good examples. Back to mentors. A mentor was able to help an autistic employee become integrated into a new role and continue to advise the person on career growth for several years. A great relationship. Those things are rare, but when you have them, they are like, jewels. Value them greatly. EAPs. An employee worked with a therapist and was able to better understand her root causes of anxiety and ended up being far more successful in her work. Again, when you have good therapists, they are to be treasured. Okay. ERGs. An ERG was able to push through changes at the corporate level in the way neurodivergency was communicated, talked about, and trained on in the HR department and later to management. That is, I think, one of the most powerful and beneficial aspects of a strong and effective ERG. Things like that. And finally, with coaches, a corporate coach was able to help an employee understand that they were in a good job, that they were in a job that was not a good fit, and help them find another position within the company. Again, those are the kind of coaches that we have here at EvoLibri, and I try hard to be one of them.
Excellent. Good stuff.
Thank you.
So how to get started. So we already touched on this, but whoops, sorry. But let's go back over it. So how to get started if you're looking for support in the workplace. First off, of course, do the services exist, right? Some companies have them, some companies don't. Larger companies tend to have them, but not always. Sometimes small companies will surprise you and have all kinds of wonderful services. So your mileage will definitely vary. Again, the first thing to do, check to see if there are any services available and how you can access them. You can do this by looking at the corporate intranet, talking to your HR rep, and even talking to your manager if you have a good relationship with them. Certainly, there's no harm in saying something like, I just feel like I really need some help using my time better. And I'm wondering if the company offers any coaching to give me some tips and tricks, for example. The next question is, will the company pay or support you in this endeavor? Now, if you find services on the intranet or by talking to HR, the assumption typically is that the company indeed is going to pay for them. If, however, you're getting dinged at work for, again, for example, not having fabulous time management, and this keeps coming up, you might speak to your manager about saying something like, I understand that this is an issue. I agree that I need coaching. If I find a coach, can the company pay for those services to make me a better employee? Now, it may seem like kind of a big ask, but the truth of the matter is it's very expensive to lose an employee and have to replace them. It costs about 1.5 times their salary to do so. And so common wisdom is it's always better to keep the employee you have rather than ditch them and start again. So it is worth the company's money to help you secure services that get you to the place everybody wants you to be, including you. So that's something to talk to your manager about and to your HR rep to see if they'd be interested or willing to help or pay fully for those kind of services. Again, for mentors and ERGs, that is definitely something you'd want to talk to HR about. Your manager may or may not know. They don't always have the full skinny on what services are available, but you can start there, then talk to your HR rep. If you talk to your HR rep and indeed there are no ERGs that suit the bill for you, you can always ask, would the company allow us to start an ERG? Are there other ERGs? Mid to large size companies often have ERGs around things like LGBTQ, people of color, new parents, that kind of thing. So if they already have ERGs, it's not impossible to say, I think we need a disability ERG or a neurodivergency ERG or something along those lines. So what you can do is talk to other coworkers that you think might be interested in that, see if they are, and if so, you can go together to HR. And for some of these things, obviously not an ERG or maybe even a mentor, but for coaching and therapy, you can always go outside. Now, I will not lie, it can be expensive. Sometimes insurance will reimburse for therapy. Rarely will they reimburse for coaching because it's not considered medically necessary. Again, which is why we always say, ask your company if they will share the costs, because that's obviously a good way to go. And if you're willing to pay for part of the services, that shows to the company you're really serious about this. You're not just taking advantage. Oh, yeah, I need help. But if you say, hey, I'm going to do 10 coaching sessions, I'll pay 50%. Can I get reimbursed for the other 50%? It shows the company you're serious, that you really do want the help and you really are going to pay attention to this. Keith, any comments?
Um, One thing, yes, particularly about ERG, this is all very valuable. About ERGs, I've heard, or at least it may just be a rumor, but I've heard that some companies actually pay employees to run ERGs. Others are run on a volunteer basis. Do you have any information about that, Jan?
Yeah, I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it more commonly, I believe, is the people who are running the ERGs are given time in their schedule to do it. Some people, some companies don't even do that. They figure, well, you do your regular job and what you do with the ERGs on top of it, sort of like volunteering, which I'm not keen on. Some people will give employees a stipend, right? An honorarium or something along those
Mhm.
lines to run an ERG, essentially a bonus for running it for a year, say. So I've seen it go all over the map, but it's certainly for people who are interested in running an ERG or interested in mentoring, it certainly looks good on your resume, right? It is another way to show that you're committed to the workplace. So I think it's a good thing to do regardless.
Excellent. Thank you.
Mhm. All righty. Keith, you're up.
Dovetailing right into that, starting an ERG as an idea. ERGs start as an idea, a way for like-minded people to work together on a cause, a purpose, or a change. What is it that you're looking for? And this goes back to why would you, want an ERG or other kind of services? A group. Once an idea is stated, the next is to find other like-minded people. This could be through a company-sponsored survey or by a group of people going to HR with an idea, or just, checking around, talking to people on an informal basis initially. A purpose. What is your purpose? Why do you want to do this? Most ERGs are birds of a feather, meaning they increase employee satisfaction by alliance with one another to remove bias, for example, preferably aligned with corporate goals. And then finally, a sponsor. Yay. Once you've identified your mission, you'll need to find a corporate sponsor who will champion you. Ask around, talk to people to find the right person who's behind you and be your advocate.
Excellent. And the note about preferably aligned with corporate goals, that is something that has slipped in to most ERG definitions in the last 4 or 5 years. I'm not sure I'm really pleased with it, but it can always be a corporate goal that you might be able to align to, might look like something like improving employee satisfaction or demonstrating cultural competency to our clients
Mhm.
or something along those lines. So you might have to get a little bit creative on finding an alignment with a corporate goal, but you probably can find something. Excuse me. And certainly employee satisfaction numbers. Those are always key, right? Most companies are very keen to keep their employee sat numbers up. All righty. So the rubber hits the road, leading an ERG. So you did all the pre-work, and like as I said before, there's a bunch of resources in the reference page that you can go read in depth about how to do this. But let's say you've done everything, you've got it up and running, and boom, you're it. So now you start an ERG. Now you have to lead it. Well, what does that mean? So a few things to consider is most ERGs are run by one or two people. I recommend two. It's nice to have sort of a president and a vice president because you're going to be slammed. There's going to be times when you're going to have to hand off some responsibilities to somebody else. So you want to make sure that you have a second person or a co-leader running it at the same time. And you also want to make sure that you've decided how long you're going to be the leader. What does that look like? And you need to decide on this up front. The reason why this is important is you don't want to become a despot. You don't want to become, king of the world or queen of the world running this ERG just the way you want it, because that's really contrary to what we're trying to do, which is build community. And when we're building community, we really have to listen to everybody else in the room, right? Now, you may disagree with them, and we're going to talk in a second about what that might mean, but you need to know that your role will change over time. When you start an ERG, also, you're likely going to refine the mission. You have a goal, a stated purpose for the ERG, but that's typically fairly high level. And pardon me, after you start your ERG, you may need to decide with this group what you're actually going to work on and how, right? So your actual tasks, what the daily, day-to-day work is going to be. So you probably will meet and discuss, what are the things we want to do to reduce bias in the company around neurodivergency. And typically what we recommend is start small. Don't start with something huge like create a company-wide training program on neurodivergency that everybody is mandatory to attend. That's going to be real hard. Instead, start smaller, having brown bag lunches, something along those lines, to see what the interest is, to see what everybody else in the company is thinking, and to find out what is needed in the organization. You may have a really strong idea of what's needed, but what will the constituency pay attention to, right? We can't mandatory people to do things. What we need to do is invite them in. And so it may take you a little bit of time to really kind of figure out how to make that work. And finally, be prepared for change. No group stays the same over time, which is why starting with smaller goals and projects makes sense, so that you can really kind of shake out what is it we're trying to do, who are we, what does the company need, what will they accept as we're moving forward. And know that, as I say, no group, once it's coalesced, will stay monolithic and the same over time. It will change. They all do. Comments, Keith?
Oh yes, again, very, very wise and practical. One thing I'm curious about, Jan, is how, if someone's starting an ERG or some people are starting an ERG, how can they find out best and professionally what the ERG can actually do and can't do? Are there often company guidelines saying this is the scope of what ERGs can do, or is it like, you do whatever you like and we'll tell you when we don't like something? Or how does that normally work? Or is there no real, pattern for ERGs?
It depends. So
Mm-hmm.
some companies have very well defined rules and regs around ERGs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some have, protocols that you must follow. You must submit meeting minutes, the whole nine yards. Others are a little bit looser. But when you have questions, and especially at the outset, you need to be leaning on your corporate sponsor, your executive
Mm-hmm.
sponsor. and asking them, hey, this is where we're going. What are your thoughts? Because without the sponsor's okay or approval, you're running the danger of crashing into the rocks. So you
Mhm.
need to have that sponsor behind you, have your back in the types of things you do. So if there aren't rules and regs that you can follow, then you need to really consult with your executive sponsor.
Makes sense to me.
Yep. All right. Keith.
And dovetailing right
Oops.
into that. Whoops.
Dang. Sorry.
Okay. Getting an ERG off the ground. Well, first, you got to tell people about it. Announce. Once you have a group of people, a charter, and a sponsor, you'll need to announce it and keep announcing it to the company as a whole on your goals and meeting times. You need to let people know what's going on. Okay. And then you've got to do it. Assemble. Some ERGs meet weekly, some once a month. There's no right way. Find out what would be best for your particular ERG. Meetings are typically run loosely following some structure with agendas, new items, old business, etc. As Jan was saying, some might have to be very formal based on what the company says. Others can be much more informal. It's like a forum. One of the most appealing facets of ERGs is the ability to share and learn from each other and to create new opportunities and ideas. It's important to let the group be flexible while sticking to its charter. Again, it's not like, this is exactly what the founder and the sponsor and the few people who started out want, and it is not going to change. That's not going to be a viable organization in the long run. You got to keep flexible. Okay. And nurture and grow. All groups change. You can't say that too often. I'll say it again. All groups change. Plan on it. Once some goals are met, more need to be created. Some will fail, some will go ahead, some will, who knows? This is a growth opportunity for you, the group, and the company. Jan?
Excellent. And you really can't say enough times that groups change, right? Because that is absolutely a given. And the one thing that I've seen with organizational ERGs that always kills them is that the leader is hell bent to keep on a straight and narrow of his or her idea. And then you have, essentially an authoritarian regime, and that doesn't work. It may not necessarily have to be a democracy because again, you're in a company. There are some rules and regs, even if they're not written down. Your corporate sponsor may not agree to certain things that the people in the ERG want to do. So it's a bit of a fine balance. But the one thing you cannot let happen, or if you do, it will certainly ring out the demise of the group, is to try to run it in an authoritarian way where you're not listening, not being flexible, not willing to compromise, because groups of this nature are indeed fluid, and it's really important that they remain so. Otherwise, people will drop out. They won't keep coming. You're going to have another ERG that takes on a different, maybe contrary opinion, and then you've got civil war. It's just not worth it. Awesome. All right. Oops. Come on. So again, to recap what we're talking about, to find your stride in the workplace when it comes to finding services. First off, what's available? Most workplaces have some sort of support available, but you may have to look around and ask. Mentoring, whether formal or informal, a mentor can help you learn the ropes in a new job or position. You can lean on their experience. Coaching, if you're struggling in a particular area, such as focus or time management, ask your HR if coaching is available for your challenges. And if they're not, and you feel that you're likely going to have some bad outcomes from some difficulties you're having, definitely consider private pay. Therapy. Many companies offer EAP, which for some common issues such as anxiety or inability to fall asleep or mild depression, EAP is probably good enough. For more specialized or deeper issues like autistic burnout, that type of thing, you may need to rely on your providers in your health plan. So you may want to call up your insurance and say, I need a specialist therapist. Who do you have for me? And go through that gamut. ERGs, they can be a great way to find support in the workplace. Meeting with other people with similar challenges really does promote confidence and solidarity in the workplace. That you're not the only person who's struggling in the same way or a similar way. So all of these are, typically available in big companies, medium-sized companies. You may have to futz around again with some of them. Not all of them will be there. And in smaller companies, really, it's about working with HR and your management to find something that works for you.
Mhm.
Comments, Keith?
Um, More of a question. Do you have any uh, discussion over about what therapy may be available? Again, it probably varies tremendously between provider and provider, but are there any typical, you know, therapy guidelines or sessions that are, available?
Well, in terms of therapeutic modalities,
Yeah.
it really depends on the individual and
Mhm.
what the challenge is. So, talk therapy sometimes is really good for some neurodivergent people, sometimes it's not. Other things that I know work well or have worked well for some neurodivergent people are things like dialectical behavioral therapy,
Mhm.
DBT. EMDR for trauma is really powerful. Empty chair sometimes works well. It really depends on the
Mhm.
issue and the person. It's a little bit like trying an antidepressant, for example. You never know. You're going to usually try something quite generic. And in this case, it would be talk therapy to see if it works. And if it doesn't work, then the clinician's going to say, okay, I think you'd benefit from DBT. So let's add a little bit of that into what we're doing. So it takes a while to kind of find the therapeutic modality that's going to work for this issue with this client. So there's no one size fits all for everybody,
Right.
sadly. And
Yeah.
that's, I think, part of the issue or part of the reason why some people kind of give up on therapy because they either have found a clinician or a therapist who's not willing to try or can't try different modalities, and they feel stuck, like they're not moving
Mhm.
forward.
Yes. Yes, indeed.
All righty. So here is our resource list. There's some really interesting articles here. I would, if you're interested in particular about ERGs or employment coaching, definitely take a look at these because this has some really great information on them and also mentoring. So have a look at these. Those would be good.
Mhm.
And we are down to 3 more this year. So the
Mhm.
next one coming up is burnout and leave of absences. We're going to talk about that. And then in October, we're going to talk about being a neurodivergency ambassador, the pros and cons. I know a couple of people who have been kind of forced into this role, and it ended up becoming rather political. So, why is that? Keith's laughing. So why is that a good thing? When is it a bad thing? Right. And then finally in November, we're going to talk about the care and feeding of us poor neurotypicals and our sensitive hearts and why we get so upset. So that you can avoid, maybe just completely avoid us might be one alternative. But the other is to understand why we might be confused some of the time. And that is it for today. And I thank you so very much for joining us. And I hope to see you next month. Take care, everyone.
Yes. Stay well.
Indeed.
Okay. We done? Or we stop recording?